There are a lot of things that you can do to improve your writing, but working on your prose is probably the most impactful. So let's talk about how you can do that. Welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is Seth. I'm a full-time author. I've written 26 books and I've published most of them. And today we're going to be talking about how I improve my prose and how you can do it too. But let's jump right into it. The most important thing about writing prose is learning to be clear and concise. Now, this is a style of writing that has really taken hold in the 19th century and continues to this day, where long, verbose sentences just aren't the flavor that people want. And there are a lot of different reasons for that, but the most important reason is that people's reading skills have actually deteriorated over time. Now, that's been mirrored by a rise in the total number of people who can read, so overall it's a win. But because people's vocabularies are shrinking, and because people just don't feel like they have a lot of time, writing complicated sentences is something that has been relegated to sort of the academic world. When it comes to novels, when it comes to stories that people read for fun, nobody wants long, complicated sentences. And so learning to be clear in your meaning and concise in your word choice will help you communicate your story better to your reader. There are some caveats here, but it's one of these things where we want to learn the rule before we try to make exceptions, because there are exceptions. I've read some fantastic works that have long and complicated sentences, but those sentence structures were always used specifically to further the feeling of the story, to set atmosphere. And that's fine. But we want to focus, as we are trying to improve our prose, on mastering the basics. And the basics are keep it short, keep it tight. One of the major challenges that new authors face, and it's certainly something I faced when I was a new author, is writing in a way that causes the story to drag. Believe it or not, the words you use, and especially the length of your sentences, can slow the pacing of your story down to the point where it just gets boring. And that is poisonous. After all, if one of your readers is bored, they're just going to put your book down. They're not going to finish. On the other hand, it's possible to write prose in a way that doesn't get in the way of the story and actually adds to the sense of urgency in the story. And that's what we want to do. We want to write short, snappy sentences that pull the reader along. Now, this leads us to our second point, which is, in a sense, a correction on the first point. One of the challenges that a lot of young authors face is that they'll start writing in a short and snappy style, but all of their sentences end up exactly the same. Sally did this. Then Sally did this. Then Sally did this. Then this happened. Then Sally did this. If all of our sentences are approximately the same length, and they're all approximately the same in terms of their structure, it creates a very boring reading experience. And remember, boring is poison. We don't want to convey to our reader that we have nothing interesting to say, or there's no reason to keep reading. Just in the same way that a monotone voice is going to put somebody to sleep, imagine a professor droning on in a class. If we keep our sentences all exactly the same, we're not going to be able to convey a sense of excitement to our reader. On the other hand, if we can vary the structure of our sentences, if we can change the lengths, if we can make sure that they're not feeling like they're reading the same thing over and over and over again, if we can do that, we're going to pull our reader through the story. And that's because we're giving them a micro problem. The micro problem is that their brain is trying to figure out a pattern. And so, because they can't necessarily figure out the pattern of our sentences, they're subconsciously going to want to keep reading so that they can figure it out. And if there's no pattern, it means that they're going to finish the book before their brain is satisfied. So while you want to be clear and concise in your style, you also want to make sure that you are varying the cadence of the sentences. And this is a challenge for every writer. Sometimes, as I'm going back and editing, I even find myself looking at sentences and being like, man, why do these not sound good? And then realizing that it's because they're just the same. The structure is exactly the same. And because it's repeated so often, it just makes for a monotonous read. Even if the content that I'm reading is exciting, because of the way it's structured, the delivery of the information is just poor. And that brings us to our third point, which is that you want to pick strong phrases and strong words to convey the information that you're trying to convey. A good example of this from my own writing is I have a bad habit of saying a character seemed to be something. That is a weak way of conveying information. He seemed to be angry is much weaker than he was furious. And you want to avoid these sorts of things as much as possible. You want to make sure that you are conveying in the strongest terms the feeling that exists. Now, feelings are not always so magnified. It might be that somebody is just irritated instead of furious. But if they're irritated, you can show their irritation in a concrete way. You want to make sure that you're removing ambiguity. Remember, we want clear and concise. So the less ambiguity we have, the better. Picking strong words, picking strong phrases, all of these things are going to help you with that clarity, ensuring that you're communicating to your reader exactly what you want them to know. All of this takes practice. Writing just takes a lot of practice. But if you can keep these three things in mind, making sure that your style is clear and concise, making sure that your sentence structure is varied, and making sure that you are picking strong words, you're going to find that your writing improves drastically. But let me know down in the comments below, do you have any particular tips for improving your prose? Are there any things that worked specifically well for you? I'm always looking for ways to improve my prose, so don't hesitate to share them with the community.